let's talk about that consumer. How can we convince him or her to make the shift towards sustainable solutions and especially energy efficiency in their homes? Rudy.
Well, I think the consumer in general, the end user in general, is getting more ready, willing and able. But I think we can do more work to enable better, encourage more, empower more. And I see this happening at three levels. First of all, at the level of the technology. So a key element in making, kind of giving more access to energy efficient solutions has to do with making end users, consumers more familiar with the existing technologies. We talk easily about LED lighting, but then when you start adding sensors and controls, that becomes a more complicated value proposition. So finding ways to demystify the technology and making it easy to use, easy to install, and easy to acquire is an important element. Secondly, I think it's about focusing on meaningful applications. Lighting is, of course, a meaningful application. Heating, ventilation is a meaningful application. If you start thinking about this, not just from an end user standpoint, a user in a home, but in the places or spaces where people live and work, then you get to talk about very specific applications for retail, for hospitality, indoor, outdoor, and so there you get into a much more sophisticated way of creating value propositions. The third element for me is really back to the incentives. It's about reducing the barriers of entry, so to speak. There's many technologies out there where today you could think about a solar installation or changing your lighting in the home where you actually get your payback within a year. Well, I think we need to do a better job in marketing, the less than 1 year payback value propositions. And that's the job of the manufacturers and the distributors and the installers and the people, talking and working with the consumer. Fiscal benefits, subsidy schemes, revenue models that change. I find it fascinating that in some countries where people invested in a solar photovoltaic installation and who succeed to generate more electricity than they use, that they have to pay to give the electricity back to the grid. That's quite remarkable because they're using the grid as a distribution vehicle for the energy they produce, which therefore triggers a distribution cost. Well, I find that quite remarkable. So there's ways there where I think you need to create an ecosystem where it's easier. I'm very happy in France to hear now that from December 1 onwards, the smart meter program is going to be rolled out. So 35 million smart meters will be installed across France through 2021. That means basically that every home, every apartment gets like a gateway to the grid. It's like your multimedia box of Orange or whoever, but suddenly you get your energy box, and if that is an interactive box, like all good boxes are, then you can start monitoring. You can, getting your energy at the moment the energy is cheap, not at the peak moments. Your appliances, and we're getting back to the Internet of Things, will recognize those moments of truth, where they will be able to source energy to do their job. So clearly, that is a very interesting way of opening up the value space called the building, for better energy efficiency.
You mentioned the Internet of Things. Let's come to it and jump right in. It's a buzzword right now. There's a lot of excitement about the technology space in the US, and here's an area where technology and energy efficiency seem to converge. Could you tell us more about your views on the Internet of Things and how that's going to be a game changer?
Well, I think the word Internet is a very important word. When I wrote my book Energy 3.0, I actually made the analogy with the Internet. And if you just put yourself back in how digital and information came together in a world of convergence called the Internet, that's what's going to happen in the world of energy, where digital and energy come together. Now, in the Web 1.0, it was about getting access to information. Wikipedia, first release. In the Web 2.0, it was about starting sharing content. In Web 3.0, it's about user-generated content. And suddenly it's part of community building, and you get into this whole new world of digital media, which is a boundaryless digital space. The same is happening in energy. In an Energy 1.0, it was about production. You didn't even worry. You just made sure that you had the right heating and that the home was well insulated. In 2.0, you get more into what I called before the active energy. In the world of Internet of Things, you get into the interactive energy management. So it all comes together. Now, for me, also here, there are 3 levels. Because at the end of the day, the first level is that your smart meter talks with a smart grid. Yeah? That's already kind of Internet of Things in its embryonic form. Secondly, your appliances, your products, your devices at home need to talk with each other through protocols. Pretty much on the basis of a very simple building automation solution. That's Internet of Things. And then thirdly, you get into the interaction that I was talking about earlier, where actually people, really have at their fingertips all the applications they need.
So these Internet of Things, which then leads to smart buildings as a solution to energy efficiency, do they exist today?
Well, they exist to a certain extent. They're already smart office buildings out there. There's some retailers who did some wonderful things by creating an interactive, shopping experience. So there's many versions of Internet of Things already today. But there's still a lot of work to be done. I mean, at home, you're not getting much further than using your mobile phone or your iPhone to control your heating like you control your music. So more to be done. But eventually, this is a huge space. Eventually, you end up with 75 billion connected objects and devices by 2020. Now, for me, we also have to demystify this a little bit. I mean, smarter buildings mean smarter cities, and smarter cities mean a smarter planet. At the end of the day, it's about smarter people. I don't think it's, at the end of the day, it's people consuming energy, not buildings. It's the people living in those buildings. And I think humanizing this discussion, I think is a very important element, because to the extent you're able to do that, you actually speak to the hearts of the minds of those people out there whose behavior you want to change. If you just put it in the hands of the building or the grid, I don't think that's an attractive way of thinking about the future.
That's where you believe that companies,
Yes.
yours and other companies, have a role to play in educating the general public about usage.
Absolutely. I mean, for example, we serve a large network of contractors and installers, people who you actually ask to come to your home to do the installation of all that. Well, many of these installers were like, I would call, normal electricians. In the future they will be system integrators. So what you see is that their profession is changing, and our role as a value-added partner, as a distributor, is to actually help them to reinvent those people to get the job done. Because at the end of the day, still a lot of the products that are manufactured out there are very complicated to install, and somehow, to make it work, you need those very skilled installers and electricians and specialists who can make that happen. Our role is to be the bridge between the manufacturer and those people.
So if I could just add, I think there is a critical, broader story here about innovation. And I know Rudy spends a lot of time on this issue, but I think more generally as a society, we need to understand that energy innovation is not just new renewable energy technology. It's innovation in how we engage the public, how we build a consciousness in the public, how people understand their opportunities. It's innovation in how we deliver energy services to them. It's going to be innovation in the business models that bring them energy from the utility to the provider of energy services. And I think the truth of the matter is there's 2 critical things. On the one hand, we need to make sure the public is confident that this energy future that we're headed toward is going to be better for them than the past. And I think the key elements in that regard are lower costs, and that's where, again, energy efficiency has a big role to play. But I think it's also got to be higher quality of life. If you think about the innovations that have really caught fire and moved quickly, the cell phone, the internet, it was both around lower costs and better service, better quality. And I think that's where we're really merging now on the energy front with innovation in lots of different ways and places, promising that joint gain of lower costs and better delivery of services.
You alluded to South Africa, Johannesburg. Are these innovations conscribed to advanced economies, or how is innovation spreading to developing economies, or what are your views on these innovations in China and India, for example?
Well, I think we've got innovation emerging in lots of places around the world. I mentioned Mayor Jensen in Copenhagen, But I could have mentioned Mayor Eduardo País in Rio de Janeiro, who has also got an extraordinary sustainability strategy in place with many different dimensions to it. And in Johannesburg, I was very impressed to see what they have done with the help of the Global Environment Facility to launch a green bond to support their investments in a clean energy future. And their green bond model is now being picked up by a number of cities in the United States. So I think there's interesting sharing of ideas and of innovations and of breakthroughs. And frankly, it's not all north to south. It is in some cases south to north in the case of what Johannesburg has done and what Rio has done. So I think there is really a recognition that the key here is to try a lot of different things. Some will fail, by the way, and we shouldn't be embarrassed about that. That's part of the story of innovation is you push forward, not everything works. You double down and invest more in the things that deliver, and frankly, pull back resources and redeploy them on the things that don't. But I think this is a story that everyone across the planet is going to be able to contribute to, and I'm excited about all of those experiments they're starting to unfold.
Do you believe in the leapfrog model, like what we saw in Africa for mobile telephones, which spread faster than fixed lines because in a way it was just easier to go to cellular?
Well, there is going to certainly be some of that with regard to communities that are off the grid. And we're starting to see, and I think this is fundamental to the energy future, a more decentralized model of electricity generation. Distributed generation is what we sometimes call it. I think that is going to be facilitated by breakthroughs in storage and batteries, and that'll help us move the kind of mainstream energy supply into a more flexible resource, as Rudy was saying. And I imagine actually, out not that very far, a decade or two, that every home will have an energy supply management structure, including the capacity to hold electricity from the low-cost times to produce and to deploy it in the higher-cost times, the peak hours. And I think that is actually very valuable for the developing countries that have not yet built out big grids, because they may be able to move quickly to this distributed generation model where we have to kind of retrofit on top of our grid structure.
Now, as a financial journalist, I've always been kind of puzzled by one aspect of this equation, which is efficiency generally means greater automation. Greater automation usually means replacing people with automats or computers, and therefore it's not conducive to job creation. Sometimes it's even destroying jobs. How is everything we're talking about with energy efficiency actually creating more jobs than it is destroying jobs? Rudy?
Well, I was hoping as a financial journalist that you would have asked me about the value we create. No, there's for me three ways to create value. One is there's the environmental value, which is very much the theme of the COP21, where we talk about avoiding the plus 2 degrees Celsius global warming. And there's a few other parameters like carbon emission reduction and so on. Very important. But there's a second element, a second definition of value, which for me is economic value, your point. But at three levels. First of all, I think we need to figure out how to make energy more affordable and accessible for everybody. Two, there is this whole notion of economic growth, which actually allows companies to generate the funds to reinvest in innovation. And then the third element is, of course, through economic growth, you create new jobs. And I was already explaining that in the world we're in, even the job specifications change, the capabilities and competences change. Not so long time ago, we didn't talk about software in the world of energy. Today, we're talking about software. So you need data scientists who look to the insights hidden in the big data. You need, installers who become integrators. So suddenly you end up with a completely new ecosystem with different types of capabilities. For me, the third definition of value is what I would call existential value, which is a bit what Dan was referring to when he was talking about, the well-being part, the quality of life part. I think that's really fundamental. I don't think you have a complete value proposition if you cannot demonstrate the impact on, the quality of life and the places and the spaces where people live and work. I think the Rockefeller Foundation and Lancet Commission would call this today the planetary health concept. And by the way, I find it missing somewhat in the agenda here, that the bridge is not really made with the broader health, the holistic view on health discussion, which I think is going to be kind of the next big thing. So It should be a triple play. It should be economic value, environmental value, and existential value coming together. And I think if you succeed to do that and make it really meaningful on all three dimensions, that's where you start making a real sustainable difference.
And I would just say that transitions, and we're in a transition to a clean energy future, are challenging, because change does mean that there will be some sectors of our existing economy that shrink, and others that expand and become the opportunities for tomorrow's jobs. I think what's exciting about the energy transition that we're in is that every society and every community is going to have job creation as we move from small amount of energy renovation to much higher percents. And these are jobs, by the way, that cannot be exported. The retrofitting of a building can only be done by people in the building. It can't be done elsewhere. And I think that means that this has got lots of capacity for a positive job story in every marketplace. And frankly, there will be technologies that emerge and grow. It may be that there are fewer utility line workers repairing that big grid, because we're going to be a more distributed generation future. But there will be people making those small-scale power generation opportunities and making the supply and demand management activities that are part of this future. So I think we have to be prepared for some give and some take, some up and some down, but that's always the case in a transition.